On the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama, nestled among a few rundown shops lining an old highway, stood a small antique store. Its dusty window display featured rusted tin cans, worn-out books, and broken frames, drawing curious eyes. This little store, a repository of American culture's past, held a peculiar charm that many believed lay in the forgotten allure of objects long out of use. The shop's elderly owner, Mr. Griffith, always greeted customers with a warm smile. Yet he often seemed lost in thought, as if trapped in the memories of days gone by. Daniel, stopping by after work, found himself absorbed in the store's treasures. As he wandered through the shelves, countless objects, shrouded in the shadows of time, seemed to wink at him. Just as he was about to leave, the mesmerizing sight of a radio pushed into a corner caught his attention. The radio was a classic piece of 1940s American design. Its curved wooden body and the round yellowed frequency dial on the front panel exuded a nostalgic charm. Daniel was reminded of old rock and roll club scenes or radio theater moments he had seen in American movies. He couldn't quite decide if buying the radio was a good idea, but he felt a strange excitement as he held it in his hands. When he asked Mr. Griffith about it, the elderly man explained that he had acquired it years ago at an auction, but had never managed to repair or get it working. After hearing the price, Daniel thought, maybe it'll add an antique touch to my home, and decided to purchase it without haggling. As Daniel brought the radio home, he witnessed the evening lights of the American countryside. He recalled the long roads stretching toward Texas, the roadside fast food joints, and the familiar scent of traditional American barbecue that greeted him in every small town. When he arrived at his house, with its large wooden porch, he carefully placed the radio in the display cabinet in his living room. At first, he tried to get it working, but when he turned the knob, he only heard a few crackling sounds before it fell silent. Sighing, Daniel thought, "It's just an old radio," and decided to leave it there as a decorative piece. However, later that night, as he sat in the quiet room with only the ticking of the clock to keep him company, the radio seemed as if it was about to come to life on its own. That night, Daniel's sleep was frequently interrupted. At one point, he opened his eyes and heard a muffled sound coming from afar. Unsure if he was dreaming or awake, he got out of bed and walked to the living room. In the dim light, he noticed the faint glow of the radio panel. Even though the radio's knob was in the off position, he could hear a murmur, like whispers emanating from deep within. It wasn't music. It sounded like someone speaking in an unfamiliar language, indistinct and haunting. He tried to turn the volume down, but no matter how much he twisted the knob, the broadcast wouldn't stop. Then, suddenly, the broadcast ceased, leaving an overwhelming silence that filled the room. Daniel found himself gripped by an unsettling sense of loneliness. The next morning, he dismissed the events as a nightmare. When he looked at the radio, its knob was still turned off, and the rusty antenna was bent. Muttering to himself, "It must have been because I was so tired," he tried to brush it off. As he sipped his coffee, he attempted to focus on the looming deadlines at work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the radio. That afternoon, when he returned home, he noticed that something felt different. For instance, the coffee table in the living room had inexplicably shifted from its usual spot. When he glanced in the mirror, he thought he saw a shadow pass behind him, but when he turned around, no one was there. Though a strange chill ran through him, he tried to calm himself by thinking, "I'm probably just overthinking because of the stress." By midnight, the radio came to life once again. This time, the sounds were clearer and more chilling. Daniel strained to make sense of what he was hearing. It didn't resemble any American radio station. Scattered words seemed to contain sounds vaguely similar to English, but the sentences were disjointed, lacking coherence. The speaker alternated between whispering and a guttural, rasping tone. As Daniel listened more intently, he thought he heard a fragment of his own name. Startled, he stepped back, but the radio continued its eerie broadcast. As he paid closer attention, he began to discern not only his name, but also unsettling descriptions intertwined with the cryptic language. His heart raced as he realized the voice seemed to be unearthing fears he had long buried in his past. Daniel had never fully overcome the guilt he felt over his father's sudden death during his childhood. The memory of that fateful night came rushing back to him. A winter storm, his insistence that his father drive, and the car skidding toward the river where he witnessed his father disappear before his very eyes. Now, the old radio seemed to whisper details about that night that he hadn't known, or hadn't wanted to remember, dragging him deeper into a chasm of fear and regret. As the days passed, the murmurs from the radio began to pick at Daniel's deepest wounds. Alone in the house, he started to feel the voice echoing off the walls, making it nearly impossible to sleep at night. Almost every morning, he would find objects displaced in different rooms, and he kept catching fleeting glimpses of shadows darting past, leaving him questioning his own perception of reality. One evening, on his way home from work, Daniel noticed headlights behind him, as if another car was following him. Though he felt he was being trailed, every time he checked the mirror, there was no one there. When he finally arrived home and turned on the lights, he saw with his own eyes that the radio's frequency dial was moving on its own. Attempts to silence it were futile. Even unplugging the cables couldn't stop the ominous whispers emanating from it. Daniel felt as though he were living inside a scene from a horror movie. Over the following nights, the radio began describing strange accidents and deaths occurring in various parts of America, delivering its macabre reports in a tone eerily similar to a weather forecast, uttering phrases like, "Another accident will happen tomorrow." At first, Daniel refused to believe it, but the next day, the news would eerily confirm the details of the incidents the radio had predicted. Determined to silence the radio once and for all, Daniel took decisive action. One night, he grabbed a hammer and tried to smash the device to pieces. The wooden body splintered, and the metal components inside were bent and warped, but somehow the whispers persisted. He began to wonder, could this be some kind of prophetic device? Daniel realized that nothing the radio revealed was about his own salvation. Instead, it seemed to predict disasters and tragedies affecting others. It was as though the radio used him as a conduit, sending signals to other places and influencing other lives. Finally, he understood that trying to destroy the radio was futile. Gathering its shattered remnants, he carried them to the basement and locked the door behind him. Yet, as midnight approached, the sound of the radio's haunting whispers echoed in his ears once again. Finally, on a winter night, as the clock neared 3, Daniel sat in the darkness, listening to one of the radio's last broadcasts, and a horrifying truth dawned upon him. The voice wasn't calling out Daniel, as he had thought. It was speaking to others, using him merely as a channel. When he listened closely, he caught words like death and escape, hinting at something far more sinister. He realized that he wasn't the radio's intended audience, but rather a conduit through which its cryptic messages reached others. Perhaps the tragic accident from his past had opened a door to this ominous cycle. Or perhaps he was just the unlucky victim of a cursed antique. As the walls seemed to close in on him, Daniel began to sense that the mysterious voice was signaling an even greater catastrophe on the horizon. The shadows he had seen, the displaced objects, and the ghastly figures in the mirrors were all pieces of a larger puzzle. The whispers from the final broadcast felt like harbingers of an approaching darkness. For a moment, in the stillness, he felt his breath catch as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Then, the radio fell silent. But just as he thought it was over, the truth hit him like a thunderclap. He now understood who the radio was speaking to, how its messages were being directed, and his own central role in this sinister chain of events. As the world around him descended into darkness, Daniel was left with the unsettling knowledge that he was at the heart of an enigmatic cycle that would never fully reveal itself. And so, he became an eternal part of the inexplicable mystery, trapped within its endless loop forever.